Are you a parent wondering if you're doing right by your kids?
A therapist looking for real-world applications and working with children and their families?
A teacher trying to navigate educating the whole child in today's world?
Then this is the podcast for you.
Hey guys, it's Brigid
And Jenna.
the teacher.
And the therapist.
All right, we are back.
Episode 8.
I can't believe you keep track. I have no idea what episode we're on. I don't even know what day it is.
I have to go back and look because then I mess up or miscount. But yeah.
The school year hasn't started for me yet, so I have no idea what day it is. Yesterday I said, is it tomorrow, Thursday, Wednesday? My other coworkers were like, you've lost it.
I thought yesterday was Wednesday, which was a bummer because it was only Tuesday. So
that is a bummer.
It was a bummer.
All right, so what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so all jokes aside, today is a bit of a heavier topic. So we do just want to give you all that heads up. It may be one that you listen to in spurts. We're actually already dividing it up into 2 because we're talkers. Or you can save it for a time that you feel able to listen. And also, it might not be one that we want to listen to around kiddos. Brigid and I try to keep them kid-friendly in case you're listening around the house or in the car. But it's heavy, but it is really important particularly for parents or people that work with kids. We're talking about childhood trauma and the ACE study specifically. But we know that kids can bring up all kinds of emotions in us grown-ups, as we've discussed. So it is important to talk about. And also a small disclaimer, trauma is very subjective. So what we discussed today does not by all means encompass every potentially traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
And the other way around. We might mention something that you've experienced and it has not had that profound impact on you.
Right.
I always use the example of a car accident. Brigid and I could be in the same car in the same accident, and I could not want to ride in a car for months and months and get very anxious. And Brigid might be like, okay, tomorrow's a new day, So
I like this fake version of me that I don't have anxiety.
Yeah. I did that for you.
Thank you.
I put the anxiety on me.
I appreciate that.
Just a small, this is Peter Levine is a therapist and a trauma specialist and someone I really like. And a famous quote he has is, trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness, which I think is really fitting, especially for what we're talking about today, because it's really focused on the household and childhood stuff. And it's something that, I don't know, Brigid, have you heard this? It's really in the therapy world that there's this big focus on trauma is not the event. It's how you react to it. I don't know if you've heard that.
No, I definitely have not.
Yeah. Which at first when I heard it, I was like, I don't like that. That feels blaming. You're telling me that my clients are reacting poorly.
Are choosing to have trauma?
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
But it's more, there's a combination. So it's the event, it's your genetics, it's the rest of your environment, it's protective factors. So
yeah. Again, that's a big one we'll touch on in part 2.
In part 2, yeah. And so even, and we're going to talk about today, you'll see as we go through it, is siblings. That can happen with siblings. You grow up in the same house and one person's really impacted or more so than another. And it could be, one was out of the house a lot. One had a good basketball coach as a support. So we'll get back into that later. But just, kind of an interesting take. And if people out there, if our listeners hear that, it's not meant to invalidate your trauma. It's really it's a combination. It's complex. I think it's more complex than the event, like a car accident.
Yeah. So I think something you always say to me, Jenna, is that you're having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always really stuck with me. That what happens to me may not be your typical thing, but how I'm responding to it is fairly normal and what you kind of would expect.
Given for what happened. Yeah. I tell my clients that all the time. I'm like, I'd be really concerned if you were totally okay right now.
Right.
After X, Y, and Z happened.
Yeah. It's okay to be not okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so ACE. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Yeah. Tell us more about these adverse childhood experiences, Jenna, or actually about this study.
Yeah. So It's exactly what it sounds like. Adverse, meaning not great.
That's what it says in the dictionary.
Yeah.
If you look up adverse, not great.
So it's an ongoing study. They've created new studies and whatever, but the original one was conducted in California from 1995 to 1997. So I was an infant baby child. Brigid was in college.
I was a full-grown adult.
So
I was in like second grade max.
Anyway, I was, negative a few months. It was headed up, the original, by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, and she's actually a pediatrician, so hence childhood. And so originally it was meant, like, they were trying to study physical health ramifications, but as we'll talk about, there's more ramifications potentially. So
I think it's interesting that this was started, like you said, by a pediatrician.
Yeah.
Looking for physical reactions. It really kind of originally had nothing to do with mental health with psychology. That's not what it was about.
Yeah.
It was just about kids.
Yeah, and their health outcomes for when they are adults.
Right.
Yeah.
So adults, ages 19 plus, were given a questionnaire. And it consisted of 3 questions from 3 main categories. So the categories were abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction. And so it talked about these things that occurred in their first 18 years of life. Obviously, these same events could occur after you're 18.
Right.
And they're still going to be traumatic.
Yeah.
But this particular study, we were looking at children because it was a pediatrician. So obviously that does not negate if this happened to you at 19 or 25 or 32.
Right.
It still could be traumatic.
Absolutely.
That's just not what ACEs specifically are talking about.
Yeah. And actually, I've always heard that what has happened in your first 18 years of life. But as we were researching this, you actually found an interesting one.
Yeah, there was one that they did at some point. I don't know when this one was out, but it was only the first 10 years.
Which is so, because even that, like you were saying, okay, if something happens when you're 19, does that negate it? What if it happens when you're 11? You're still in the house. You're still a kid.
Yeah.
So that really surprised me.
Actually, I think it even said before your 10th birthday. So it was for 9.
Oh, so even if you were 10,
I guess once you're
one
10,
day,
10 trauma doesn't count anymore.
Yeah. We'll have to look more into that one because that was, listeners thought it was a typo. I was like, no, it's 18.
Yeah.
And Brigid was like, no, it says 10.
It did.
So,
yeah. Crazy. I don't know when that particular one was done, but they've moved back to 18 now.
Yes, the more recent ones.
Yeah.
But, okay, so what are some of those questions out of curiosity, Brigid?
Okay, so I really am going to emphasize again that these questions can be hard to hear. If you're not feeling like you're in a good state for it, maybe pause and come back before we read these. But we are going to just go through what some of these original questions are. Okay, so the first one says, did a parent or other adult in your household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid you might be physically hurt? Another one is, I'm not going to read all of them. Okay. We'll read all of them the second time, but for now, I'll just read a few. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way? Attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Let's see, another one. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Another one, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes, often, or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit at least a few times, for at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or a knife?
Oof.
Yeah, those are just some of the questions that we'll look at, or that the original study
looked at. Yeah. So thank goodness they have made some updates to it, because just hearing that, just some of them. But Brigid, do you see any potential issues or changes you would have made?
So many issues. First of all, I think often or very often. I mean, does
subjective.
It really, right? Does it really have to be often?
Sure.
If one time your parents
could be impacted.
Yeah.
It could impact you.
You wouldn't need multiple times. Or the one that I read that stuck out to me was the the sexual abuse one.
Yeah.
That they had to be 5 years older than you in order to qualify for this particular thing. Like, that doesn't, I don't think there's an age limit there, so.
It is, and I think that one, because that one actually, if you notice, is like, has that ever happened? So that one is more of like a one-time thing, potentially,
but they still had to be 5 years older than you.
Yeah.
If it was your older brother who was 4 years and 3 months older than you, it doesn't count.
Right.
It wasn't traumatic.
Right. Yeah, and I think, again, like, that's definitely one of the problems with it, and I think they probably are going kind of off of, like, a legal definition. States have different laws and, like, different definitions, but typically, yes, like, quote-unquote childhood sexual abuse would be someone 5 years or more older than you. But, of course, like, we see, I'm not going to say, I was going to say all the time, not all the time, but we see sibling on sibling sexual abuse, sibling on sibling other physical abuse. Yeah, it's still traumatic if you're 2 years apart, if you're twins, if you're whatever.
Yeah.
So, so they have updated it. One thing that sticks out to me, it's like, it'll say, did a parent or other adult in the house ever, or often, very often, insult you, swear at you, blah, blah, blah. But then, like, one that really sticks out to me is, was your mother or stepmother ever, blah, 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 slapped, kicked, hit with something hard? Like, as if, number one, you're assuming that there's a woman that lives in the house. And number two, is it not traumatic if it happens the other way around?
Right. Like, if your mom is screaming and throwing things at your dad, I think that's still traumatic.
So, yeah. So then a newer one, this one is from 2022.
So this one, I think maybe we'll read through and give our listeners a chance to kind of come up with their own ACE score.
Sure. Yeah. It's out of 10, everyone. So, and again, prior to your 18th birthday. So, did you ever feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect or care for you? I think, this is another good distinction, Brigid. Did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or other reason? Yeah. When I read that first one, I was like, only if they got divorced?
Yeah.
But not if anything else happened. Did you live with anyone who was depressed, mentally ill, or attempted suicide? Did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or using drugs, including prescription drugs? So I take that as it would be a misabuse or misuse. Did your parents or adults in your home ever hit, punch, beat, or threaten to harm each other? A little bit more inclusive. Did you live with anyone who went to jail or prison? Did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, put you down? Did a parent or adult in your home ever hit, beat, kick, or physically hurt you in any way? Did you feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were special? Did you experience unwanted sexual contact, such as fondling, anal, oral, vaginal intercourse, or penetration?
So then the way it works is that you would get 1 point, basically, for each
one you said
yes to.
Yeah.
And then something this one does at the bottom is, do you believe that these experiences have affected your health? And so you would kind of reflect not much, some, or a lot.
Yeah.
And I actually really like, there's a quote on the bottom of this particular ACE test that says, experiences in childhood are just one part of a person's life story. There are many ways to heal throughout one's life.
I do like that a lot. Yeah.
It's just one part. So you could have an ACE score of 10 and have all of this trauma, but that's just part of your life. And
sure.
And that doesn't mean you can't heal from those things. Yeah. So I think that's really good to think about too.
That is really good. Luckily, I have a job.
Yes.
So. But yeah, and I do think some of the problems or things we brought up, Brigid, were kind of corrected in this updated one.
For sure.
Losing a parent through a different means, like abandonment, death, whatever. It says, I think, I'm not sure we read this one, but I think the first one says, like, did a parent go to jail? And this one says, does anyone you lived with go to jail?
Okay.
Oh, no, it does say household member. Okay. Because I was thinking older sibling or something that would be traumatic as well. But, and yeah, not the mom or stepmom being phically abused.
Just any parent or any adult.
And like, you know.
I remember the first time I ever did one of these, it was at a trauma training.
Oh, okay. For work?
Educators, yeah. And we did it, and they did not have the version the question that we had was, did you ever like lose a parent through divorce, separation, or imprisonment, I think.
Okay.
And I was like, well, no, but I still lost a parent. Like, I was like, how is the fact that my mom died not a trauma that I can count on?
How can I? Yeah, like, I'm supposed to say no to this?
Like, it would be more traumatic if they just divorced. Like, so personally, I was glad to see that changed and that included like a death of a parent. Because to me, that
specifically,
was pretty apparent that would be a traumatic event. But what do I know?
A parent didn't.
Okay, so the changes we think are definitely good. I know, like, if I were to go through the original example, I might have a lower score.
It might depend.
But kind of when you look at the other one, the updated one, it's easier to kind of see.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, maybe those things kind of did impact me in a way I wouldn't have looked at if it was just the black and white of the first one. So I'm really curious, though.
Yeah.
What are these? What were the results? Oh. What did they find?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely like the updated one more. It takes away that very often that you were talking about as well. I have kind of a hot take for therapists, but I don't think that the ACEs are the end-all be-all that, you know, we thought initially with like the original study results in the 90s. Because, of course, like there are other things that can have similar outcomes. And this focuses on things that happen only within the house with just one exception. So it's like, right, that doesn't account for severe bullying, any other traumatic events.
Right, because they could live outside of your home and it could still be traumatic.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, and the only one that accounts for that really, it sounds like, from how I'm interpreting it, is the sexual abuse.
Right.
The rest says is a household member beating you or whatever. But so I am going to go over like the actual results, but first I'm going to kind of summarize in layman's terms so it's not too statistical.
Yeah.
If you're like me and, you know, don't like statistics, got by the skin of your teeth. So yeah, like I said, it was designed for physical health. So there were some physical health outcomes that they looked at. So there's increased rates. The higher your ACE score, you have a higher likelihood to have heart disease, cancer, lung disease, liver disease, and diabetes. And that's specifically for people with 4 or more ACEs compared to someone with 0, which, who has 0? I don't know. Then they also found like mental health related correlations that depending on the correlation, you could be anywhere between 4 and 12 times more likely to abuse alcohol and drugs, experience depression, and even attempt suicide. And interestingly, even other things that you wouldn't necessarily think, like you're more likely to have a fall or an accidental injury or even unintended pregnancies.
That's very
which I thought was interesting. Like you're more likely to fall. I don't know. I don't get it, but I think they mean like, you know, big substantial falls, but still interesting. So results include 33% of people in this original study said that they had at least one ACE. So at least one of those 10 from the original. These are from the original. 25% of people reported 2 or more. And then over 20% reported 3 or more. So I guess, yeah, if we're doing the math and we add all that up, some people did say 0, but not a large likelihood.
Yeah. Most people did have at least one.
Something, yeah. And then those with 4 or more ACEs showed, like I said, a 4 to 12 times increase in alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, and suicide attempts compared to those who reported 0. So not necessarily if you had like 1 or 2.
Right. And
then the same thing, people who said they had 4 or more compared to 0 showed a 2 to 4 times increase in smoking, poor self-related health. So they were asked, like, how healthy do you think you are? And if you had 4 or more compared to 0, you rated yourself lower. 2 to 4% or 2 to 4 times rather increase in STIs and having 50 or more sexual partners. Again, very specific thing that they looked at, and then you also had a 1.5 times increase in physical inactivity and obesity. So I know, kind of scientific, but
that's
the overview.
Some pretty interesting results.
Yeah.
Something I kind of do wonder though, if there's more to it than just those ACE scores. Because, you know, like for an example, your typical like white upper middle class family in general is going to be less likely to have those higher ACE scores. They still have some.
Yeah.
In general, you're not going to see that as much. And so I wonder, is it really related to the ACE scores or just growing up in poverty and as a minority, and just I think it's definitely valid to consider like why
Like
are
the
they more
context.
likely to have these things.
Yeah, sure.
Because obviously we know, like, just statistically speaking, a Black male is more likely to be incarcerated.
Be imprisoned,
And so then obviously that's going to be a higher likelihood that his child is now going to have that ACE score there. And whereas, you know, that white upper middle class family, maybe whatever, they could get a better lawyer or this or that or whatever.
They're not like discriminated against in the first place.
So, or just that generational, like, when your parents did what they had to do to survive and that's how you grow up. And so, I don't know. I wonder if there's just maybe a little bit more than just ACE scores in those results.
Right. I definitely feel that way. I think context is really important. And I think more and more mental health professionals are leaning that way versus like when I was in grad school, it was like the ACEs are the end all be all. This will tell you whether or not your client has trauma.
Yeah.
And I always say everyone has trauma.
Yep.
You know, I had a colleague who at a previous job said like, oh, you must work with a lot of trauma based on kind of what you're saying, based on where I was working. There was lower SES clients, there more like racial minorities and all of that. And I said, well, everyone has trauma, right? Everybody's had something that like affects them.
Yes.
And it's different for everyone. Another one that I think is a good example is divorce. Some kids come in my office, they're like, thank God my parents got divorced because the fighting stopped, whatever was going on in the house.
And now my parents are happy.
Right.
And
and obviously, I see that co-parenting is going great and smooth and wonderful. And you see the other side of it where it's a very contentious and, difficult divorce and the kids are more negatively affected. But
it is traumatic for that.
Yeah. But that's a huge criticism, especially of the original. In the original, it was like the lack of diversity and it doesn't take those things into account. So almost 75% of the participants in the original 95 to 97 study were white. And then the same amount had at least some college or higher level of education.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it does make sense because there can be like compounding variables. Somebody with lower than a college education is already more likely to attempt suicide. That's a correlation. Obviously, we're not saying one causes the other.
Right.
But that's something we already know. If you smoke and drink, you're already at an increase for heart disease, liver disease, cancer. So is it because you're smoking and drinking more? Or is it because you have these ACEs and that directly relates, to heart disease?
Right.
Probably not. And something that really sticks out to me, and it's actually something that I have come across in my work with clients, is the very first question is, did you ever have to wear dirty clothes? Did you ever feel like you didn't have enough to eat? And that doesn't necessarily mean your parents were like withholding food from you.
Right.
Or starving you on purpose. Like in lower SES households, you might be limited,
right?
Or you might still be hungry if you're growing but it's limited and this is what you get. Or, you, like you were saying, adults do what they have to do.
Right.
The adults aren't eating, or as the kids get older, they have to eat less or whatever.
Or if you're in that like single parent household and mom's working 3 jobs, maybe she didn't have time to do your laundry. So maybe you are wearing dirty clothes to school. But that doesn't mean that like your mom wasn't trying or didn't love you. So there's so many variables and so many factors.
Right.
And that's, I think, really where the idea that trauma is not the event, but it's the other circumstances.
Sure.
So like wearing dirty clothes, if your parents are just saying, F you, I don't care, you don't get to eat, you don't get clean clothes, you don't get anything.
That might be different.
That's going to be traumatic. Whereas, like, if your parents are doing their best and they shower you with love, but they don't have money to buy you an ice cream cake for your birthday, that would just be maybe not as traumatic, even though it's the same event. But
you're disappointed.
Trauma.
All of that's valid. And
right.
Yeah. And I just also want to validate, because I think a lot of times if I've worked in settings where we have to like give the ACE, quiz or whatever to people. And it came up even today. I wasn't doing the ACEs, but just in a conversation with a client, I'm like, they don't want me to think that they had like a bad family or bad parents. And I was telling my client today, like, I don't think that. You can love your parents. They could have done the best that they could do under the circumstances.
Absolutely.
And it still impacts you. And it wasn't enough, or it wasn't what you needed, because every child is different.
Right.
And
right.
so maybe it worked for your older sibling and it didn't work for you, and they didn't know any better. So it can still impact you. And that doesn't mean you have to like disown your parents or that they're horrible.
Right. And even
or the
talking
adults.
about that, like siblings can take the same ACE quiz
and
have
different.
completely different scores.
Did you ever feel like you didn't have enough to eat? I might say yes. My brother might say no.
Or did you ever feel like you weren't special or loved in your family? Maybe I would say yes, but my brother would say no.
It's like, very subjective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can have these range of answers even within the same household.
Absolutely. Some of them are a little bit more like, did someone go to jail or not? But some of them are very subjective.
Right. And I actually feel like, honestly, I've taken it, multiple times throughout, like since the time I first took it in my training. And Jenna, for some reason, we seem to talk about ACE scores all the time. So we kind of go back to it every now and then. And I kind of feel like almost every time my answers are different.
A little bit different.
Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I think I would say yes to that. And then other times I'm like, no, I don't think that counts for me. So even in the same person, sometimes your answers are going to change.
Or throughout your life, and it could depend on like what is going on that day that made you think of that one instance. Or certainly if you're taking different versions of the quiz, that's going to change it. But yeah, it might just be like, oh, okay.
And the end of that one, the updated one that was, how much do you feel like this has affected your health? And some days I would probably say not at all. And other days I would say so much.
A lot,
like it completely changed my life. So it just depends on what space you're in too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I do think, all things considered, I think there are things that we can learn from this for our own mental health, for the children that we work with, the children that we care for. But also, I think maybe this is a good time to like take a pause and
digest.
Kind of like sit with that, think about our answers, because that's a lot. And next time, maybe we can dive into a little bit of how we can help those children with high ACE scores, or how we can help heal our own trauma if we have high ACE scores too.
Sure. And how that shows up in the classroom, in the therapy room.
Absolutely.
And might show up for our viewers in their houses or workplaces. So
yeah.
Great idea, Brigid. You're the smartest chap I know.
I told her to say that.
Bye. We'll talk to you soon.
Yes, and it'll be brighter and happier next time.
Yes, all the solutions coming your way.
You got it.